Questions and answers. Oh, I'm sorry. Unless she were to choose to split her time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be sharing my time this evening from the member from Calgary Rocky Ridge. So it is always a true honour to stand in the House of Commons, represent the amazing people of Peterborough, Kawartha, and so many Canadians across this country who feel their voice has been truly muffled, after 9 years of this Prime Minister. So tonight in the House, what are we talking about? We're talking about the concurrence debate of an NDP motion in Finance Committee. So here's the motion. Given that the Canadian grocery sector made more than $6 billion in profit in 2023, and that the millions of Canadians have reported food insecurity in the last year, the Standing Committee on Finance call on the government to immediately take action by implementing an excess profit tax on large grocery companies that would put money back in people's pockets with a GST rebate and establish a national school food program, and that this motion be reported to the House. So that was the motion that was put forward by the NDP. And, we Conservatives put forward an amendment, and the amendment stated, excuse me, the 19th report on the Standing Committee of Finance presented on Monday, May 6, 2024, be now concurred in, but that it be recommitted to the Standing Committee on Finance with instruction that it amend the same so as to recommend a more efficient alternative to address food insecurity among Canadians this summer by calling on the government to eliminate the carbon tax, the federal fuel tax, and GST on gasoline and diesel between now and Labor Day. So here in its fundamental essence is the difference, is the choice that Canadians have between two ideologies. You have one Liberal NDP approach that's like, let's go after, let's put a Band-Aid on this. And then you have the Conservatives who are saying, let's actually figure out what's causing food to rise so rapidly, and let's try to fix it. Let's try to make life more affordable for Canadians. Let's ensure that their paychecks actually work for them and that they're able to have autonomy and freedom and be able to not have that stress of feeding their children. So I want to talk about the Food Banks Canada latest report card launch. I co-sponsored this event, and I have to tell you, it was shocking, abysmal, heartbreaking. To be honest with you, it was the stats that came out of this report card from Food Banks Canada were the worst ever. And it was a morning event, and there was representation from the Conservative Party, there was representation from the Liberal Party, there was representation from the Bloc, but not one single NDP member of Parliament was there. Not one. And I want to tell you some of the things that came out of that. Canada has reached a critical turning point as poverty and food insecurity worsen in every corner of the country. This is from the Food Banks report. 61% of food bank users in Canada last year were first-time users. 50% increase of food bank visits. 1 in 4 Canadians are experiencing food insecurity. 44% feel financially worse off compared to a year ago. And 2 million people a month are accessing a food bank, historical highs. 1 in 3 of those are children. Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker. The problem is if you continue to tax and punish the people who grow the food, it will keep driving up the cost of food. What I find so remarkable, and I even heard a member from the Liberals say this, but I also heard it on a recent power play on May 22nd, where there was a Liberal and an NDP members talking about this. And they actually said, an excess profit tax will eventually be downloaded to the consumer. What do you think the carbon tax is? What do you think the carbon tax is? Who do you think pays for the carbon tax? If it costs the farmer more to grow the food, he's going to have to download that to the trucker who comes and picks up the food. So now the trucker has increased costs. That cost is then increased down to the grocery store owner who has to put it onto the shelf. And then guess who has to buy that? The people. Like, they actually say it, and then they vote for it. And then you have this wild ideology that has been said in this House where it's like, you know what? Why don't you just let the planet burn? That's their kind of go-to. They shame people, or they'll say, we saw this across the board with vaccinations. We saw this across the board in so many things. If you don't do what we say, if you don't think like us, you're bad. You're a bad person. And I want to tell you, this is a message I got from David Jones. Hello, Michelle. Thank you so much for all you do for our city and for striking back against our current Prime Minister and his completely out of touch and irresponsible leadership of our country. My family and I, which consist of myself, my wife, and our 3 young children, are struggling to pay for gas now with the new tax that's been introduced. We want to voice our opinion and hopefully give you more fuel to tell our Prime Minister that his tax makes no sense and is harming the very people that is supposed to help. I work for a nonprofit in town helping youth who are at risk, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to be able to afford to get to the places I need to be to support them in these increasingly challenging times as they face record highs in fentanyl, overdoses, and completely unaffordable living conditions in our country and in our province and in our city. This is the Jones family. Thank you for telling me this. Thank you for writing in. Brian Hawes is a farmer in the Otonabee South Monaghan Township. And Brian has been, speaking out about the carbon tax and what it is doing to the consumer, to the small businesses. You have small businesses that are shutting down at record rates. They can't compete anymore. They're just getting squeezed and squeezed out. And then you have this record high usage. This all comes down to making life affordable. The more you tax people, the less money they have in their paycheck. They can't make ends meet. Everything goes up. The more, if you're spending more than you're making, you drive up inflation, and you have this vicious cycle. So why not make life more affordable? It's literally the most compassionate thing to do. You're right now spending more on servicing health care, on the debt. You're spending more. The Liberals are spending more on servicing the debt than they are on health care. Health care in this country is in I don't need to tell people watching this. They already know what it is. They already know they have to wait in the waiting room. They already know that when they go there, there's people who've overdosed. Last week, at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, out front of the Rideau Centre, a person overdosed in the middle of the sidewalk. That is the reality of this country under this Prime Minister. I want to talk to you about what Brian Hawes says, because he's a farmer, and he's the one that is growing the food. And he said, carbon tax has put 60% on his drying costs in the last 2 years. I said, how does that impact families buying food at the grocery store? And Brian said, quote, it's incredible because that's just one spot where we get nailed with the carbon tax. When you bring your wheat in, for example, and you dry the wheat, boom, carbon tax. Then when we truck the wheat to the elevator, carbon tax. Then when the elevator trucks it to the mills, there's another carbon tax to make the flour. Then when it goes to make the bread, there's a carbon tax. Then the freaking, his words, loaf of bread has to be wrapped in something. There's a carbon tax on that. Then it has to get to the warehouse. Another carbon tax on the fuel, for example, and on till it goes to your grocery store shelf. Bread has gone up 75% under this Prime Minister. Tanya Bailey sent this to me today. It's her gas bill. And her customer charge is $22, her delivery is $39, her transportation to Enbridge is $16. The federal carbon charge is $50.17. It's to the point people have just completely lost hope. They've lost everything. And people are actually losing their homes on top of it. You have building that's halted. You have builders that can't build, right? You have builders who are testifying at HUMA committee saying there's no chance they'll meet their target. Because guess what? All of this carbon tax, all of these things add up to the cost of building houses. So we put forward this common sense motion today and said, listen, okay, people need to be able to focus on something positive. When you're sinking, you need to know summer's coming up. Families need each other more than ever. Kids need their parents. Parents need their kids. They need connection. They're on their screens. They're disconnected mentally, physically, because they have to go to work to pay for this. Both parents are struggling so much. So we put forward this common sense motion that's going to save Ontarians in particular $590 if they cut the carbon tax on fuel between now and Labor Day. Right? It's like, come on, guys. Like, just give them a break. And no. The message was, no, put your kids in a car and let the planet burn. That's what the Minister of Health said. So again, I will stand here today and I will say, Conservatives will fight for you. We are listening. We know life is challenging, and we understand that the bigger picture is to make life more affordable. That is the goal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member from the Honourable Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I wanted to first off correct the record. The Minister of Health did not say, let the planet burn. What the Minister was talking about was climate change and the need for Canadians and everyone in this entire world to take climate change seriously, and that we do not want to see the temperatures increase and we do not want to see the world burn. That was the intention of that comment. So I'd really like to ask this member, what kind of a plan do the Conservatives have to stop climate change?
The honourable member from Peterborough Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, well, it might not have been his intention, but it's actually verbatim what he said in the House. And that's the reality of it. So, you know, I think there's this element of shame, and it's been the approach, as I said earlier in my speech. The Minister of Health went on a rage, like a full-blown rage, and said, yeah, let's be like the Conservatives and go on a road trip for 10 hours where our kids don't get any bathroom breaks and we let the planet burn. That's what he said. I'm not saying that. He said it. So whether he intended that or not is not the point. But to her question about what would the Conservatives do, I find this a fascinating question. We say it repeatedly. I'll say it again. If you trust Canadians, especially farmers who are environmental stewards of this land, if you trust businesses who want to do the right thing, who are environmentally friendly, who care for this planet, to get out of the way so they can afford to do that and invest in their business and not have to shut down, they will do the right thing. But this Liberal government prevents businesses from doing anything. Anything. They're leaving this country. We have nobody coming in. They don't even want to do business with Canada. That's the first place to start, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Peterborough Kawartha continues this Conservative thesis that the carbon tax is the primary driving factor behind the skyrocketing food prices that we've seen. And yet they've actually crunched the numbers, and it does increase prices, but by such a tiny amount. Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary found it increases food prices by 0.3%. Last January, food price inflation was 10.4%. So the vast majority of food price inflation is driven by something other than the carbon tax. What's it driven by? Well, first of all, it's driven by corporate profit taking. Secondly, it's driven by extreme climate events, somewhat ironically. And thirdly, it's driven by challenges in the supply chain. And yet she didn't mention any of those other factors in her speech. The other thing I'll note is that last month the carbon tax went up and food price inflation went down. And perhaps my question to her is how, if the carbon price is the primary factor driving food price inflation, how could that be possible?
The honourable member from Peterborough Kawartha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listen, there's an ideology clash here deeply, and I think the other thing that he left out is that the Prime Minister has spent more money than he's brought in. That's just a fact, and he says the budget will balance itself. I don't care about monetary policy. We've heard that over and over again. But I just want to bring up some points, because I think if you listen to farmers, so when I go back to Brian Hawes, who owns Hawes Acres, and I say, Brian, people don't really understand how significant this is, being the carbon tax in their day-to-day life, and he says, I really believe that people don't grasp the gravity of this carbon tax on your day-to-day life. It affects absolutely every facet of your life. Everything you own, everything you buy, everything you do is carbon tax compounded on top of more tax, and then you pay the tax on top of the tax. In this year, the Prime Minister's carbon tax will cost families in Alberta $2,943, in Saskatchewan $2,618, in Manitoba $1,750, in Ontario $1,674, in Nova Scotia $1,500, in Prince Edward Island $1,605, in Newfoundland and Labrador $1,874, Canada-wide $1,963. Canadians do not have this extra money.
Extraordinarily short question for the member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Whatever time she's got left, perhaps she could finish her thoughts on this bizarre attack on the family road trip that we've observed from this side. It's just, it's bizarre.
I'm going to unfortunately ask the honourable member to do this in 12 seconds.
There has been an attack on families since the day that Prime Minister came into office. We have the lowest birth rate in history. He doesn't care about the family. He cares about power and control, and so does that NDP leader, because he's sold out his soul to ensure that he keeps power. And that's the reality of this Prime Minister.
Resuming debate. Going from a short question to a 10-minute speech. The honourable member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well,